Okay, so hi everyone to this Black Pioneers in Animation panel for Virtuous Con. I'm your host, Carolyn Hinds, and today I'm joined by four amazing animators and artists and creatives in the industry. I'm joined by Pearl Lowe, Frank Abney, Everett Downing Jr., and Peter Ramsey, and we're going to ask them to say a little bit about themselves before we get into this. So, Pearl, can you please go first?
Yeah, hi, I'm Pearl Lowe. I'm a storyboard artist, illustrator, and comics artist. I'm currently working at Cartoon Network on Craig of the Creek, and I also work in feature film. I've worked on Canvas by Frank. I worked on Hair Love too. Everett was part of that. And I also work for Scholastic, doing some comics, and I'm currently adapting The Adventures of the Bailey School Kids, and it's coming out this summer.
Frank?
Hey everybody, Frank Abney. I've been an animator for the last 14 years or so, and jumped into directing. I directed a short film called Canvas that's on Netflix now, as well as executive producer with Peter Ramsey on Hair Love, with Everett also down there, and Matthew Cherry, and currently I'm a director over at Netflix Animation on an unannounced film yet, but it's very African, and you'll learn about it later. But yeah, just a little bit about it.
Great. And then Peter, and then Everett.
Yeah, Peter Ramsey here. I started out as a storyboard artist in live action and moved over to animation at DreamWorks Animation, where I directed Rise of Guardians. And then after that, was one of the directors on Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse. And since then, working on a hybrid project for Netflix and executive producing and helping out with a bunch of animated projects by friends and neighbors. Me.
And I'm Everett Downing. I've been a storyboard artist and animator for like 22 years now. Worked all over the place. Worked at Pixar, DreamWorks, Sony. Co-directed the Hair Love short with Matthew Cherry and Bruce. Bruce. Oh my God! I almost said Bruce Tim.
It's so easy. You're gonna feel bad when you remember.
I know. And man, I'm failing. And right now, currently, I'm EPing and show running on an original show called My Dad the Bounty Hunter at Netflix. Bruce is gonna kill me, by the way.
I forgive you. And I'm a freelance film critic, journalist, entertainment writer, and also a podcaster. And so my first question is going to be for Pearl. And this panel is to talk about the creativity and the creative process of animation. And for you, Pearl, you are a storyboard artist, and you've worked on Hair Love on the project with both Frank and Everett. So can you just talk a little bit about creating the difference between creating a static character, like one for a book where the character doesn't move, whereas you have to create one for a film where it will move and it will have and it will be animated. So can you tell us the differences and the challenges from doing static to animated?
Yeah, I feel like at first, I feel like when I first got into comics, my reason for getting into it was because, like, oh, I'm a storyboard artist. This feels, kind of like a lateral shift. Comics seem kind of similar. But I found that, with something that moves like film and animation, the visual language and what kind of information you need to include is different than illustration. I feel like just because the time that you have to take in certain images is different between the two mediums, certain things that you have to include will be different. And I think that the balance, like finding the balance between what you need to show and what you don't need to show is something that I've been trying to learn a little bit about. For example, like if I'm doing storyboards and I'm doing like a scene or an action, I tend to break down poses by doing like a lot of in-between drawings, depending on whatever you need, to show. But for a panel for comics, you only have like one panel and so, like a page. So you only have a certain amount of space. But you can also be more detailed in that way because, a person who's looking at a page can take their time and, look at different things versus on a screen when things flash by. So there's just certain differences between those types of things where you have to take into account the audience and how they're receiving information and what will be the best way to like kind of like communicate that to them depending on the medium. Mm-hmm.
And for any of you gentlemen, anything to add to that? Your own thoughts and ideas about the process?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I mean, when we started Hair Love, one of the things that we were doing is we were trying to, we really loved the artwork that Vashti Harrison was doing for the characters, and just translating that from like, it's a beautiful like, illustrative style. We know in animation like that doesn't always translate into animation. So how can we capture the spirit of that, like, when we actually take it to the animation phase? So a lot of thought is put into like, what are the pieces that make this, feel like it's the artwork, versus how can we make these, a lot of it's simplifying, right? Simplifying shapes or simplifying lines. So there's not as much like line mileage like for 2D. So you're not spending as much time, like you're kind of boiling it down to its essence so you feel it without actually having to like redo these amazing, complicated and complex drawings every frame, because there's 24 frames like a second, so it can be a lot.
I'll add a little thing just on the impact of the performance, regardless of what the how rendered the drawing is. I remember when I started on Coco, like when we had our first or my first screening of it, and it was in boards. Some of that was it's like kind of borderline stick figure, but I'm in there like it still has that effect on you. So it's like as long as you're communicating, the idea, in animation, like it's all that you really need.
And going from that, Peter, your film Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, I think is one of the most unique animated films that we've seen in years, because it has so many genres within it and so many animation styles encapsulated within this one film. And like there are like there's like 2D and then there's 3D elements to the animation of the film. And one of the ones that really caught my interest is the pointillism, which is used for is Spider-Man Noir, and then there's also like the old time comic strips and comic books we used to see. So could you just tell us a bit about incorporating that into the story and using those different styles to tell the story of Miles in particular?
Yeah, one thing we really wanted to do with Spider-Verse was, we were introducing a new Spider-Man to a lot of people who'd never heard of Miles Morales. And, Peter Parker in the comics is so familiar to people for the past few decades that we really wanted to try and make a big impact with this new version of Spider-Man. And part of that was a new look, a new feel. I think the other part of that was, we were just all of us were really wanting to break away from kind of the dominant style of CG animation. That's it's kind of been technically perfected by this point, but all CG movies, all CG American features, I should say, kind of tended to look the same. So we really wanted to kind of push forward with a new style that was going to feel a little less computer driven, a little more handmade, something that was more about the individuality of an artist, which is what you get when you read a comic. So we decided to take kind of the forms and the rendering styles of comic books as the template for our look. So something like the dot pattern that you'll see in the movie is taken from old school comic books that were printed with this kind of half-tone printing process where you could clearly see the dots making the different colors, and that sort of started to become the basis for our graphic language, because there were things that we wanted to do without things like motion blur, which all CG features use. It was something we wanted to sort of get away from and have a crisper, more graphic look. So our solution was to take the visual language of comics, which are pretty graphic and crisp, at least classic comics, and use that language, whether it's the halftone dots, whether it's panelization, whether it's seeing the sound effects on screen, whether it's the different kinds of ink lines on the characters' faces to convey emotion or to just punch in the visuals. All that stuff was kind of an effort to define a new style that got away from the sort of the soft and like computer rendered look of CG and started reminding people, hey, people draw these things by hand. It's like a one-to-one relationship with the viewer that can have more impact if you feel like this thing is being made by real live people.
And this is a question for all four of you, and I kind of want to go off on that because all of you have worked on projects that are about Black people and about the Black experience and Black community and family. And I want to ask you, going off of Into the Spiderverse, is like how intentional are you when you're creating the environments of these characters, and they are about Black characters, and how that informs your animation styles? Because, like for instance, Canvas, I thought Canvas is interesting because there's the 2D element, but that's focused on the literal canvas of the story being told, the painting. And then into the Spider-Verse, you have the different animation styles. And like for you, Ever, you've worked on, as I said, Hero Love. So can you just tell me about using the characters' ethnicity and race to inform the design of the characters themselves and their environment and the animation, overall animation style?
Yeah. You want to go first, Frank?
The first thing that just came to mind was just pulling from home. That was. I mean, you mentioned with characters and the experiences and stuff. Like, I feel like not even thinking about a Black experience necessarily, or even pulling from anyone else's kind of. It's always just coming from home. I think about growing up with my mom and sister and having an early relationship with my grandparents, my grandpa, all these things that are still really fresh in my mind. And so that's the stuff that I'm pulling from first, when I'm thinking of like, an experience. And then, just when it comes to characters, it's like the same kind of process, but I feel like there's an extra bit of care, I think, as a Black creative, having that responsibility to put the necessary work in. I always connect to, like, you think of like these films that are studying fish, and you're looking at scales and how the water affects all this stuff, and then it's like we got to put that same energy into Black characters as well. So when it comes to our features, our hair, how our skin reacts to light, all those things that make our experience what it is, the same effort needs to go into that as well. So those are the kind of things, like where my head goes from in the early phase, and then like when we're actually visualizing.
But it's a good point, though, Frank, that it came from your real experience of being Black, because it's you, you're as a person, and it's like there's lots of different kinds of Black experiences. So you can like, you can fall into this thing of coming up with something sort of bland and homogenous and something that's not really drawn from life. If you only go so far, if you're looking for some kind of like one size fits all Black experience. I know, with Miles, we tried to be as specific as we could. I mean, first of all, he's Afro-Latino, so that's a huge component of him, obviously. But then it's like, okay, he's from Brooklyn, this is his family situation. This is the neighborhood they live in. This is what his mom and dad do for a living. Where would they live? What would Miles' situation be? It's kind of all those things that are inherent in the character, and you sort of have to like build that into the frame of what you're saying about that character to make it feel really believable and rooted. And it's like, okay, how would that person as a Black person react to these things in their environment, and how would their being Black shape what's around them? So it's a little it really does turn into what's about the reality of this person and their environment, and how do I make that feel specific, and how do I make those reactions to the world feel real and immediate, and not like not like a checklist that you're checking off.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's all about a lens, right? Oh, I know. Go ahead, Pearl. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I really also appreciate the mention of just like different Black experiences. Just as an Asian Black person, I feel like a lot of times people, do have a checklist and you're like, okay, let's bring on the Black person, and this is how you're going to help, build an authentic character, an authentic Black character. I'm like, well, I can help you build how I like, pull from my lived experience, but like I'm not every Black person, so, and I think it is, through the specificity is where you find connectivity, and, putting that into the work and into the world that you're building really shines through. And I think that also those characters in the world that you're building deserve that. I think that, having such a general brushstroke over everything is it's just not fun storytelling in general. And that's not the people that we see out reflected in the world. And I think, taking the time to actually make sure that we kind of capture that, by, having diverse people on the team, by bringing yourself to the project. I think all those things really help build a really strong environment, strong world, and story that you're trying to tell.
We have a question from the audience. One is, what would you recommend media-wise, in brackets comics, for representation of Black love? I'm guessing they're trying to figure out which medium or animation medium would reflect that better. I'm guessing.
Did you say comics in there?
Yeah, they had comics in parentheses. So they said media-wise and then comics in parentheses.
Oh, I'm sure there's some great ones. I'm not really up on the latest comics right now, so ironically, but
There's a
Yeah, I don't know.
I like.
Yeah, what do you think, Ed?
Bitterroot's pretty dope. I mean, that
oh yeah,
that's being adapted into a series right now, but the book itself is pretty great. There's a really good friend of mine. He's got a label called Kid Comics, and they're doing a lot of it's great because there's a lot of representation, Black representation, but they also have representation from other cultures. Like it's pretty amazing now, because like, I'll be honest, like if you dip out just for even a little bit of time, a lot has changed. So I'm just getting back into comics after taking a hiatus, like a kind of a pandemic hiatus. So I'm sure the landscape has changed completely.
I'm sorry, Carolyn, did the question say something about Black love in comics?
Yeah, they said for representation of Black love. So the way
Right.
that's what they said, but I'm guessing
That's what I was like.
Yeah.
Got you. Okay.
I
have to think about that one.
Yeah, I haven't been up on the comics in a long time as well, so I couldn't answer.
Yeah.
But I mean, I will say the series, the animated series based on Hair Love, is called Young Love. So
yeah,
that is definitely it feels like that's definitely going to be an element of it in animation, which is I think the fact that we're all kind of standing here going like, wait a minute, I'm not sure.
Right.
Shows you how rare it is.
What I can think of, because I'm not really a comic reader, is one written by a friend, Stephanie Williams. She did Living Heroes, and it's basically a comic adaptation of the MCU and DC mashed up together, set in the style of Living Single. So, but she does have relationships between the Black characters and the that's the only one I can think of, and that's the one I would recommend.
Wow. Sounds like we have a need that somebody can fill.
Right.
I don't know how many people are watching the panel, but put together a little anthology book. Romance comics have historically been pretty big, so it sounds like this might be the moment.
For sure. And so my next question, I'll direct this one to Frank, and then as usual, everyone can answer. We talked about the different animation styles, 2D and 3D, but can you talk about the challenges of creating these different mediums? Because I know as all of you are storyboard artists, and part of that is when you're doing the animation process, you have to figure out the physicality of these characters. You have to figure out how they're going to move and give each character has to be someone different. So can you just tell me the challenges of creating the physicality of these characters for storyboard, and then how do you determine the differences, because there's so many characters that you're creating and you're just one person. So you guys are, in a sense, to me, actors as well. And can you just talk about the technical process of storyboarding from your own physicality and your own movements?
Mm. So I guess I can kind of, because I don't storyboard, but I can kind of channel that into animation. Just because I mean, if you're talking about purely just physicality and kind of um, building different performances outside of your own physicality, like I mean, I've had to animate, you know, characters from Violet to Dash, Frozone to a big panda that knows kung fu, and you know, it's all like um, it's all like you're pulling from yourself first. You know, if you are one of the, you know, type of animators that kind of act your own scenes out, which I do. But also, yeah, you're trying to animate out your own physicality and get specific into how this character moves, and that pushes you to research. So you know, Kung Fu Panda was kind of a different story because, you know, there's areas where he does feel heavy and you know, it has, you know, he struggles with, you know, moving around with his weight, but then there's also the side where he feels really light on his feet. You know, like you think of Jack Black, you wouldn't really think he would be as light on his feet as he is, but you know, he's pretty limber and but I think starting from, you know, the personal, and then digging into the specifics of whatever that character is, what their physicality is, pulling from reference, pulling from, you know, also just trying things too. You know, there's a lot of times, you know, you'll kind of do a walk cycle or something like early on in pre-production. You're kind of getting a sense of how this character navigates, how this character holds their weight, how they you know, hold their weight in terms of their confidence, also their confidence level, their personality, and so there's a lot of testing that goes into it in the beginning, where you're trying to you know, just kind of get yourself in the realm where everybody feels happy with how this character moves, and then, you know, all the animators can learn from that, and then we can all be on the same page as we're, you know, you got 100 or so animators on a film, and it needs to feel like, you know, it's all coming from one hand pretty much. And so I think it's, yeah, just a blend of yourself, the research, and also your imagination and how some of these characters would move, because, you know, some of them aren't based in reality. So, you know, you're pulling little things from other existing things and trying to make something new out of it. So hopefully that answered in some way.
Does anyone else?
Yeah, it's funny. It's really funny because when you asked that question, I was like Frank. I was like, oh, it's easier to answer that question as an animator. But I've done both, so it's funny to think about both sides, like story and animation, because animation is very much like, some people get method about it. They think about like, oh, like, you know, Mr. Incredible's a big guy, you know, like, and really kind of get into the mentality of kind of like where this character is coming from. You know, when you approach a shot, thinking about his weight, thinking about how he moves. But it's interesting because when you're doing stuff on the story side, it's like animation is all about the physical, but it's almost like the mental transforming into the physical. So it's like your whatever's going on in your head transform to your physical body, right? And writing and story is all about like, where's this character coming from? What's this character made of? It's all the mental stuff. So, you know, for example, if I get a sequence in boring, like it's all about what's this scene about, right? Like where's this character going? You know what I mean? Like what's he dealing with? What's his background? And then like where is he at this point of the story? And you know, if it's a solid script, this character, you know, is going through the paces. He's getting the screws tightened on him. So it's kind of all about getting in the mentality of like, oh, this sequence, he's feeling celebratory. He won, but I know at the end of this, he's going to get crushed because something happens in the middle. How does he react to that? Like, what's he about? Is he proud and something lays him low? Like, takes a strike at his pride and like knocks him down? How does he react to that? So it can get pretty deep.
Yeah, I feel like also, just because I've been in the story department like my whole entire animation career, I feel like and like when you're thinking about a character and how they would act and how they would move, you think about, I personally think about the environment a lot, like Everett was saying. Like if a character's really short and it's like they need to do something in an environment that's like really like tall or something like that, they have to maybe use props and like help themselves out to like do certain actions. And like you are kind of being an actor and putting yourself inside that character's head and being like, okay, I actually can't do this in this scene. What would I use to help myself out? And then you draw like that. And same thing with like, which is like a cool connection between like animation and storyboards, is that I often feel like posing in animation, like key poses, is what I would think about for posing at my characters in storyboards, to make sure that like I have like key outstanding like poses that really describe what the character is about and how they move body language wise and whatever they want to say, and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, storyboarding tends to be more about, because the other thing you're doing when you're storyboarding, you're thinking in terms of shots. You're designing frames and you're composing and you're thinking of the edit and you're kind of telling the story that way. So it's a little bit of it really is. Storyboarding is a little more like directing. Animation is like being an actor. The animator really is creating the performance of the actor, and how would I react within this frame? That's going to be sort of like determined by what you find in the storyboard, which is about how am I going to frame this action so that this character can perform within it in a specific way. So they kind of go hand in hand, but they do slightly different things.
And how has the advancement of animation technology helped or created more challenges with regards to getting the physicality of these characters out? Because we know like there's the programs that help you like do body movements, and you can put them into the programs, but then you still have to rely on your own, as we said, physical knowledge and your own environment. But how has the advancement created either challenges or has helped you grow as animators doing this?
I think so. I used to work in games, so we used mocap. But then and we had we didn't have like the big like capture stage, so we had this little cart that we move around and we can shoot whatever we wanted. And there was some even though it's there's like a pro and con to it in my opinion. I think some people really like working with mocap. I guess because I wanted to be in film, like it was like I'd rather animate it myself. So there was like, but there are some things that you can learn from these tools also. Like if you're using facial capture technology or motion capture with the body, like there's still some things I think as an animator or story artist or 2D, like just studying the physicality and studying the nuances that happen in the face. If you're using facial capture and you're pulling little things that you can use in your polishing phase when you're polishing your facial animation or even the body, like how how the body moves, when you're studying the locomotion of certain actions. And I think those are things that I took some things that I learned from that and then brought it later, as I'm not using that when working in film, but remembering how the spine reacts when in this certain action or the little twitches that happen in your eye or your eyebrows when you're just like little things like that you kind of pull from that technology. But I think as far as like more on the beneficial side, I'm kind of like, I guess, quote unquote old school. Like I haven't used a lot of new tools. Like I'm like, there's new stuff in mine all the time, and I'm like, well, I'm used to doing it this way, so I'll learn that when I have some downtime. But like, if I'm already in the flow of something, like if I was animating, I kind of stick with, just to kind of like do my thumbnails. I'll act it out in front of the camera just to kind of get a sense of, the physicality and also trying out some things mentally, like when I know, what the character, what the motivation is and everything, like trying some things out in terms of where the character's headspace is, and then from there just kind of getting into animating. But I know there's some things that people can try. I mean, even within that realm, like some people have multiple cameras so they can see their body in front and side, and if they want something more specific, or there's like stuff even with like, what was it, Xbox or one of these consoles where you can actually like facial capture in some way. Like I don't know, but it's technology is always changing. I can't keep up, honestly.
I know that the animators that I've worked with in the movies that I've directed and worked on, It's like the people who have the grounding in just like solid old school animation technique, usually, people know 2D animation, and they know that well. There's no technology in the world that's going to improve on that. It's the technology makes it's sure it'll make I guess it will give an okay animator help with some things or make some things easier. A good animator who uses that stuff can do great work. So it goes back to the fundamentals. It goes back to understanding things about you know anatomy, movement, weight, perspective, all those basic things that good animators learn with just with the most basic tools. That's going to help you more than any new piece of tech, I think.
Yeah, that foundation is going to need to carry whatever you put on top of it. So
Yeah.
It's really interesting because I get nerdy about the tools, even though I haven't animated in years. But it's interesting because they're getting more granular. You're getting more control. You're getting more things, and that stuff, like kind of to Peter's point, where it's like when you get like a really talented or an animator who's really willing to push things, they're always going to ask for that. Like Frank, I'm sure you heard just like, hey, can we get a control here? Can we get a control there? Like, and it's funny because like the more tools that you get, there's always going to be animators like, hey, can we get even more control? So I think it's really about like, I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing that these tools are at our fingertips now. But there is something about kind of keeping it simple, right? Kind of like it's great to kind of push things, but starting with the basics, getting that foundation. That's the most important thing. Like the other controls is kind of like icing on the cake. You know what I mean?
While Peter and Everett were speaking, something occurred to me, and when we think of like older films that did a lot that relied solely on 2D, like Bambi, or like the old Cinderellas, like they will always have a classic feel to them. Like they don't really age. But then when you think about like a lot of the newer films that are hyper realistic and like you can't tell, like there is like you're fully immersed in it. But then like 5, 6 years down the road, you look at them and you're like, this feels very, not to be insulting for anyone that you worked on, but it feels dated. Like you can tell exactly when it was created. And then, like whereas where you have like the 2D element, like that classic feel it won't age, even like going like 100 years down the road, it will still have that nostalgic feeling to it. So that's where I think having the fundamentals and the basics, and like we always say go back to basics, like that's the same for a reason. Like that's where a lot of us as like I'm 37 years old, born in 1983, but like one of the first animated films I have a clear recollection of is Bambi, right? And like, these are things that we will always connect with us, and we will always like have that nostalgic feel to them. And I think it's important that animation styles, no matter how far they progress, that is still like embrace the history of animation. Like I'm just saying it strictly as a fan, as someone who watches them, just like that they keep those elements in them and don't lose them, because they think that's just that's what we originally fell in love with.
Yeah, I feel like at the core of it too, it's just like we're all just trying to storytell. And I think that using these tools, I mean, drawing on paper is slower a lot of times and a lot more like paper everywhere and like, just like a lot more resources potentially than, digital programs that can, lessen the amount of resources you need to use, for example, for like storyboarding. But I think that, you do find that even though we have technology that can make things look super, super rendered, you also have folks who are really interested in trying to recreate nostalgic feels and textures of past movies using new technology, because it just makes things faster, but they still really do appreciate that kind of feel. So there's kind of like all sorts of things you can do with technology, but I think having the basics is very important.
So we only have a few minutes, so I'll just ask an audience question. Is actually one I was going to ask. Now that we have like studios, we have like the big studios, like you have Pixar, Disney, DreamWorks, and all these, but we also have Netflix now, and Netflix is like basically taking such a big chunk of the animation industry. But as creatives, working with from like the big studios and then work with Netflix, like how much creative freedom do you have now as directors and producers and creating your own projects versus when you were just storyboard artists and animators? You gave your opinions then, but now you have like more control over it. Like, how much creative freedom do you have with these studios now?
I, I can jump in. I think, I mean, there's the, I guess, the natural progression of just being in a different role. You know, there's the different freedom that comes along with that as well. Because you're, you know, now that I'm directing the film, you know, it's coming. You know, I'm in that place where, you know, we're crafting the idea and we're working out what's needed. All that. So, you know, it's a different place in the pipeline. But just to speak as an animator and yeah, as an animator at these studios, you know, working on these films, just the level of creative freedom. I think you have a place where you need to go in terms of what this character needs to do over the course of the shots that you're on and the sequence that you're working on. So you're playing within those, I guess, constraints, but within that, I'm always trying to find something personal to put into my scenes that I'm animating. So, you know, even though I have, let's say, I'll use Soul as an example. You know, one of the scenes I animated with Joe showing up to talk to Dorothea, in the moment where he's trying to get back into the band, you know, back into the quartet, or the, you know, how you want to, you know, there's a moment of him, you know, just kind of like staying his place, you know, where he belongs and what he feels he deserves and what his life is, and so the goal of what he needs to express there and who this person is to him in terms of status. But then for me, I'm thinking of other situations where I may have done that and what I can put into it. So we have that kind of freedom to bring our version of that truth to the scene. And you know, we can try different versions, and you know, show director, and you know, it's up to them to see, like, okay, well, this fits in the film in this particular moment. But yeah, we have a pretty good amount of freedom to try things. You know, just, you know, as long as we hit those goals that's needed out of the scene. What
Yeah.
about on the story side? Or,
What was that?
I was
Oh.
saying, what about on the story side?
On the story side, freedom, you know, it's always a negotiation when you're working with a studio. You know, studios, obviously, you know, that's part of the deal when you're making a project at a studio. That determines, okay, there's some, it's not just the sky's a limit. It's the limit within, you know, what that studio generally makes, you know. So you can push at those limits and you can like bend them, and you can, you know, suggest new stuff to help redefine those limits, or whatever that might be. But it is always like a constant kind of communication and dialogue with the studio. So, uh, you know, in like Netflix, for example, I'm involved with like, I think like two projects, maybe three, with them, and so far that's been really good. You know, so far it hasn't been too different from other experiences I've had at you know, on the other movies I've been involved with, that it's like, okay, yeah, the studio, you know, is definitely wants the project, whether it's a movie or a series or whatever, to deliver certain things. You know, like a company like Netflix, they want people to keep watching. They don't want anybody changing the channel. So that's going to determine things about pace and, like, you know, it's going to determine some story stuff. Is this something that's going to grab people's attention? You know, it's going to determine some things about the style and aesthetic. You know, and that can be on a pretty subtle level. It can also be on, like, you know, a much more intense level. Like, yeah, we this has to be faster and paced up so that, you know, people stay glued to it so they don't change the channel. So there's, like, you know, I think there's a lot more freedom than ever in terms of content, you know, which is great. You know, the themes, especially as, you know, Black creators and you know, people of color in general. There's obviously right now there's a really nice really nice feeling of more possibility and opportunity to explore that stuff. It's still ultimately within the frame of, you know, uh, kind of mainstream entertainment. So but like I say, it's a dialogue with that, you know. And if you're that's just kind of the playing field we're on.
Mm. Okay, so we
And
have to wrap up now, but thank you so much for this discussion. This was very informative because you did answer questions that I've always had about animation. And thank you so much for spending the time with us and the audience today for joining us. And for closing statements, can you tell everyone where they can find you on social media?
Okay, do I start with myself? I don't know. I don't know if we're all in the same order on screen.
Go ahead, take it away, girl.
You can find me at perlo.com. That's just my main site that I have all my stuff on. My social media is also on there, so just go to perlo.com and you'll see.
And Everett? Oh,
you can actually find me just edowning.com. That's the edowning.com. Same thing. All my information is there. You can check me out there.
Peter, and then Frank.
You can usually find me on Twitter, pramsey342, but it's going to be a lot of politics, so sorry.
And I'll throw my website, frankabney.com, but I don't know if I updated with my socials. But Twitter is at Frank Abney, the letter I, Frank Abney, and then Instagram just at Frank Abney.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at CarrieCNH12. I'm always on Twitter. Anyone knows me, I'm always on Twitter talking about my shows and like tweeting. And you can find my work on my authoring page. It's linked in my link tree for my Twitter and my Instagram. And that's it, everyone. This was a blast. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. See y'all.
Bye.